Revenge with Karen.
I had 3 minutes left to go through my slides when Zach leaned in behind me and said, too loudly, "Make sure you don't screw this up." His breath smelled like spearmint and desperation. I didn't respond. Just clicked to the next slide, the live metrics. AI performance benchmarks ticking up in real time. The kind of demo you only get once in your career. In the corner of the monitor, I saw the list of attendees. 37 investors, including 4 from Northbridge Capital. Cameras off. Mics muted, but they were watching. Outside the glass wall of the demo room, people hovered like ghosts. PR, legal, finance. Even Brett, the board chair, had taken a seat against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes on me like he was watching a horse he'd bet the mortgage on. I took a breath, straightened my blazer, and spoke. This is our second-to-last model iteration before production, seeing the real-time inference across our demo data sets. The latency variance is within 3.2 milliseconds of target. I clicked again, which brings us to projected efficiency at scale. The slide changed. My chart vanished. Zach had overridden the feed, just hijacked the deck like a toddler snatching a toy. I turned, slowly. He was smiling like a man who'd just peed in your gas tank and wanted applause for the aim. "Sorry," he said, mic hot. "Thought I'd jump in here to talk a bit about vision." And just like that, my stomach turned, because I'd seen this before. Men like Zach always wanted to jump in. They just didn't know how to build anything worth landing on. Now listen, before we go any further, do me one small favor. If this story already has your blood pressure flirting with a restraining order, hit that like button and maybe subscribe. It helps us keep telling these insane but true stories. Plus, you never know when the next corporate disaster will need popcorn and a front row seat. Anyway, I kept calm. Let him finish his 3-minute ego flex, all vague nonsense about synergies and new leadership paradigms. I nodded like it was his birthday, and he was showing me his macaroni art. Then, when he finally stopped, I took the clicker back and said, "Let's finish strong." We did. The demo closed like a dream. Real results. Real interest. Even a thumbs-up emoji popped up from one of the muted investors. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I just let it hang in the air. But my gut was already whispering. Zach had been gunning for me since the day he was hired. Said things like, "We need to evolve the org chart, and you've got legacy vibes." Whatever that meant. He'd asked for my project files 3 times in the past week, accidentally got added to a dev Slack, and started questioning architecture decisions he didn't understand. He introduced me to someone as one of the engineers, even though I'd been leading the AI rollout since day one. It was the kind of corporate foreplay you get before the knife goes in. I stayed late the night before demo day, cleaned up the repo, handed off a sanitized version to legal, locked my architecture files in a private vault, just in case. Now I was glad I had, because as I walked out of the conference room to refill my water, I heard Zach whispering to Brett near the hallway printer. After today, Zach said, we make the change. I didn't stop, didn't turn around. I just walked past like I hadn't heard a thing. But inside, something ancient in me uncurled its spine. Not fear, not anger, it was calculation. I went back to my desk, pulled out the printed copy of the term sheet I kept in my second drawer, and flipped to the page I already knew by heart. Clause 4.2b, contingent employment named officers. And there it was, my name. Black ink, legal gold, let them fire me. Let them try. The next slide was a simple one. A bullet point summary for Q&A, deployment timeline, rollout risks, licensing options. I clicked forward, opened my mouth to speak, and Laura, "That's enough," Zach said. At first, I thought I misheard. My brain searched for some rational translation. Maybe he meant he'd take over Q&A, maybe he wanted to split questions. But then he stepped into frame, mic live, voice sharp. "You're fired. Leave now." Silence. You could have heard a Slack notification in Beijing. I blinked once. Just once. He didn't even have the decency to look unsure. He stood there with the dumb confidence of a man who's never built a thing in his life, but thinks owning cufflinks makes him a visionary. The screen behind us froze on my last slide. Deployment begins Q4, subject to stability. The irony tasted like pennies. I didn't speak, didn't ask for clarification. I just turned to the table, set the clicker down like I was placing a flower on a grave, and walked off stage. My heels didn't click. They thudded, steady and final. The board didn't stop me. Brett looked like someone had just slapped his dog. Legal blinked like they'd short-circuited. No one moved, and the investors, still muted, Dozens of square black boxes with initials inside, staring back like a jury that hadn't expected murder in the opening act. I walked out of the room. Didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. I just kept walking until I hit the hallway, past the elevator, pushed out through the side exit into the October wind. My blazer flapped like a broken sail. I could still feel the lights of the demo room on my skin, like heat that hadn't caught up to the cold yet. By the time I reached the end of the block, my phone was already buzzing. Slack, logged out. Email, access denied. Company phone, disconnected mid-vibration. My world went dark in under 60 seconds. I ducked into a coffee shop I used to work in during college. Same crooked tables, same barista smell of burnt espresso and half-cleaned milk steamers. I sat in the corner booth and pulled out my personal laptop. Just muscle memory, just habit. I didn't cry. I opened the term sheet. Clause 4.2b, still there, still binding, no amendment, no replacement plan filed. I checked the timestamp, still valid, still legally radioactive. And that's when the absurdity hit me. Zach really thought this was about ego. This was about winning a queue and a session. About who got credit, about optics. As if I was just some coder with a nice blazer and decent public speaking skills. He had no clue that I wasn't just the face of the AI project. I was the clause, the condition, the trigger. From the moment he said you're fired, a countdown had begun. And nobody, not legal, not the board, not even Zach, understood what he detonated. Yet, there was a long, hissing silence on the live stream, one of those digital voids that crackles louder than a shout. Zach stood there, blinking at the camera, still facing the room like he hadn't just decapitated the entire pitch in front of 37 silent financiers. Then came the click. Unmuted. "Where's Laura?" a voice asked. Male, clipped, maybe late 50s. You could hear a pen tapping in the background. It was David Feldman, senior partner at Northbridge, man who'd flown to San Francisco just to walk through our prototype last month. He didn't sound angry. Not yet. Just confused. Dangerous kind of confused. Zach let out a small chuckle, like someone trying to charm their way through TSA with a switchblade. "We're in the process of a strategic leadership realignment," he said, hands spread like he was presenting a damn wedding cake. Laura's transition was already in motion. Today's demo was just the final baton pass. Another unmute. Was she informed of that? A woman this time, Rachel from Hide Ventures, because it looked like you blindsided her mid-sentence. Zach's eyes darted just for a second. Then he doubled down. It was always the plan to introduce fresh vision during the investor rollout. "Laura's a talented engineer, but we're pivoting to, you might want to stop talking," said Feldman. Then came the moment. The actual moment. Feldman shared his screen. There it was, our term sheet. Northbridge's logo stamped in the upper left. A highlight box glowed around section 3.4, clause 4.2b. Continued funding is contingent upon the ongoing employment of the following key personnel. Laura Kim, Chief Product Lead. Feldman didn't say anything. Just let the highlight sit there, glowing like a fuse. In the room, I'm told Brett leaned forward so fast his glasses hit the table. PR whispered something to legal. Legal didn't whisper back. Zach, to his credit, didn't visibly sweat, but his jaw twitched, just once. He opened his mouth, unmute. "Did you terminate a named officer without board notice?" This voice was deeper. One of the silent money types. Black square labeled K Mitra Iona Capital. No nonsense. No camera. Zach hesitated. I acted within my operational authority. "Who signed the amendment to the term sheet?" Feldman again. "Calm now, too calm." Zach blinked. "We were finalizing transitions. Legal is reviewing. There is no amendment," said Rachel. "We have the latest doc on file." Inside the room, a rustle of paper, chairs shifting, someone coughing. PR dropped her phone, trying to mute the speaker. Zach raised his hands again like Moses mid-Red Sea. "Let's take a breath. This isn't a breach, it's a restructuring." Laura was not irreplaceable. The tech speaks for itself. "Funny," Feldman said, "because our money doesn't." Silence again. Not empty this time, pregnant. Like something large was creaking, slowly turning its head. And all the while, I sat in that coffee shop across town, watching it unfold from the live stream replay. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and refreshed my inbox. Nothing yet. They hadn't figured out how deep this rabbit hole went. Not yet, but they were falling in. One confused investor click at a time. The barista had asked if I wanted a warm-up twice now. I just nodded the second time, not even tasting the coffee anymore. My phone was propped up on the salt shaker, screen cracked but doing its best. I scrubbed backward on the replay with my thumb, rewinding to the moment Zach said it, "You're fired. Leave now." I watched it again. Watched my own face stay perfectly still, way someone does when they realize they're not in a meeting, they're in a trapdoor. I'd already killed my Slack access from my personal admin console, revoked all tokens, server credentials gone. I had a quiet exit protocol set up months ago, just in case the board ever got cute. It was something I'd baked into my contract at the beginning: quiet hooks, soft exits, leverage by omission. All above board. All mine. A text buzzed through from Emily, a lawyer of 10 years and the closest thing I had to religion. "Emily, you were named as an officer. They didn't file the amendment. Emily, not just key personnel. Officer of record. Page 14. Exhibit B. Emily, you want blood or money?" I didn't answer. Yet. Across town, I imagined Zach standing in front of the board, trying to wrap what was left of his dignity in phrases like agile repositioning and leadership evolution. Probably offered them some limp future org chart with a box labeled interim product, lead TBD. The kind of slide that sounds like a plan when you're scared of admitting you just threw your only pilot out mid-flight. PR must have been running crisis drills already. Probably sent an email to investors about a planned succession and how vision continuity was a top priority. I pictured them digging through our comms stack, trying to forge a narrative out of whatever scraps hadn't already been torched by Feldman's screen share. I knew they'd try to make it about fit, that I was difficult, that I wasn't aligned with new leadership direction. It would start polite and turn acidic fast. That's how it goes when a woman builds something real and refuses to get steamrolled by a junior exec with nice teeth and a fragile ego. But none of that mattered now. Because the moment Zach said fired, did it on record, he triggered something he didn't even know existed. He thought I was a pawn. He didn't realize I was holding the rulebook, and he just set it on fire with his own signature underneath. I forwarded Emily the replay link. Subject line, "Start here." My coffee was cold, and I didn't care. I opened my laptop, logged into my personal vault, and reviewed the contract drafts. Emails from 14 months ago. The negotiation threads, all legal, all time-stamped. The officer designation. The term sheet tie-in. The board's original approval chain. Even the email where Zach was CC'd. He hadn't opened it. You could see the tracker, unread, of course. The man had walked into the company like he'd bought the building. Never asked who built the foundation. Never even looked. My phone buzzed again. "Emily, I'm drafting the breach letter. Want to sign it today or make them sweat?" I stared at the screen. Zach thought the fallout would be loud. Angry, maybe even desperate. A crying woman on Twitter begging for her reputation back. But that wasn't me. I wouldn't scream, wouldn't tweet, wouldn't even flinch. I'd do something worse. I'd wait. Let him patch his PR lie. Let the board try to memory hole the clause. Let the investors sip their morning coffee tomorrow and start asking very quiet questions. By the time they looked for me, I'd already be 10 moves ahead. The compliance call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp the next morning. No calendar invites. Just a single-line email from Northbridge's managing partner. "Let's clarify the chain of authority before moving forward. Counsel to attend." Translation: no more lies, no more spin. Bring your legal team or bring a shovel. Back at HQ, they scrambled. I could almost hear the panic echoing through the executive floor. Legal interns rifling through PDFs. Half-asleep general counsels squinting at embedded footnotes. Zach probably pacing a trench into the carpet outside the boardroom, while mumbling about optics and narrative control. That morning, someone finally opened the folder labeled term sheet final executed PDF. And there it was. Clause 4.2b, bright as day and legally bulletproof. Continued disbursement of investment funds is contingent upon the uninterrupted employment of the following key personnel. Laura Kim, Chief Product Lead. Any change in designation, role, or employment status must be disclosed and amended in writing no fewer than 30 days prior to implementation. Failure to comply constitutes material breach, subject to immediate suspension of funds. No ambiguity, no wiggle room, no strategic leadership realignment loophole. Just me, inked into the spine of the deal. Around 9:12 a.m., my phone rang, not Emily's line, not a blocked number, just Brett D-board lighting up the screen. I waited a beat before answering. "Laura," he said, voice tight like someone trying not to lose their composure in a glass office. "Quick question. This clause 4.2b, were you aware of it?" I took a breath, then let it out slow. I had all the time in the world. Of course I was. I wrote it. Silence. Then you wrote it. It was part of the IP retention strategy, I said. You remember, the one I pitched to legal when we revised officer designations to protect the AI framework from executive turnover. You approved it, so did counsel. I included it in the board packet. October 12th last year, you even asked if it was enforceable. I told you it was airtight. Another silence. This one longer, I see, Brett said finally. Okay, he hung up without saying goodbye. I turned back to my laptop and opened the investor channel logs. Sure enough, someone had started asking about deliverables. Not just tech, personnel continuity, oversight, audit logs. Zach hadn't been copied. They were cutting him out, slowly, surgically. Removing pieces of the problem before the rot spread any further. Junior associate from Iona Capital finally pinged the rest of the legal thread later that afternoon, just confirming that no written amendment was filed regarding the personnel clause. No 30-day notice. No replacement designation. This appears to be a breach. The reply from Feldman was 6 words. Suspend payment schedule pending legal clarification. And that was the moment the $50 million deal flatlined. Not with a press release, not with a leak to TechCrunch, but with a quiet thread in a legal inbox, flagged high importance, buried beneath 5 other crises no one could afford to touch until this one stopped bleeding. Emily messaged me a few minutes later. Emily, they're spiraling. Zach called our office. Wants to chat. Me. Ignore him. Let them sweat. Emily, you want me to draft an interim reinstatement proposal? Or push for settlement terms? Me. Neither. I want the board to call me themselves. And they would. Eventually, because this wasn't just about getting my job back. This was about reminding them whose name they built this on, whose work held the architecture together, whose foresight saved them from themselves a dozen times before Zach even knew what side of the building the bathroom was on. And now I held the fuse and the fire, and I was just getting warm. By midweek, the spin machine wheezed to life. Internal memo circulated at 6:42 a.m., titled Leadership Evolution Brief. The language was pure buzzword soup, something cooked up by a sleepless PR intern and a panic-stricken Zach in a whiteboard war room. It described a dynamic cultural shift and a reassessment of role fit. And without naming names, it strongly implied that Laura Kim, me, had struggled with collaborative adaptability and alignment to evolving mission goals. Human terms, I didn't smile while being micromanaged by a LinkedIn peacock who thought AI stood for aggressive influence. Within an hour, a second document began quietly making the rounds. Less polished, not public-facing. A narrative doc marked internal use only with phrases like increasingly combative, resistant to vision, and my personal favorite, escalating territorial behavior over product control. It was laughable, and a little desperate, because now Zach had no room to maneuver. The term sheet clause had sucked the oxygen out of the strategy room. HR wouldn't commit to backing his claims, too risky. Legal had gone dark entirely. PR issued a non-update update to investors. We're working toward an aligned leadership framework, which is corporate for we broke the engine, and now we're duct taping the steering wheel. Investor relations wasn't having it. At 10:17 a.m., he sent a direct note to the board and the C-suite. Please explain the rationale and process for the leadership transition during the live demo. Investors require clarity on succession planning and personnel compliance under term conditions. Response requested within 24 hours. The please was cosmetic. Behind the scenes, Emily had already moved. At exactly 11:04 a.m., one-line document was submitted via DocuSign to every address listed in the officer notification protocols. Notice of Material Breach Clause 4.2b, Section 3.4, term sheet dated mm/dd/yi signed. Time-stamped. Irrevocable. A digital whisper with the power of a wrecking ball. I didn't call anyone, didn't email, didn't tweet a cryptic quote or post a blurry photo with a loaded caption. I just stayed quiet. Silence, I've found, frightens people more than shouting. Silence says you know exactly what you're doing, and you don't need permission to do it. Zach, meanwhile, began flailing louder. He tried to schedule an all-hands to reaffirm team momentum. 3 department heads declined. One outright said, let's wait until the dust settles. He tried to get my direct reports to write documentation summaries. They ghosted him, pushed a narrative to the product team that I'd left of my own accord due to creative differences. Someone forwarded me the Slack thread. It had one reaction emoji, a clown. He tried to frame the breach notice as misunderstanding, even floated the idea that the clause might be non-binding without shareholder ratification. That was the moment I knew he was done. Because once a man starts rewriting contract law in front of venture attorneys, he's no longer operating from strategy, he's operating from fear. I sat on my porch that evening with a whiskey and my laptop. Didn't even need to open the newsfeed. I could feel the pivot coming. This wasn't just about me anymore. The investors had gotten quiet, not indifferent, studious. You could sense them gathering their questions like a jury watching the defense unravel. And Zach, he kept barking into a void that wasn't barking back. Hadn't realized yet that I wasn't fighting him. I was letting gravity do the work, letting his own words, his own actions, pull him deeper with every attempt to claw his way out. The truth was simple. I didn't need to discredit him. He was doing it for me, and by the time he looked up again, he wouldn't be standing at the top of a company. He'd be at the bottom of a breach notice, with no one left willing to pull him up. Zoom call opened with 6 black boxes and 1 camera turned on. The paralegal from Dorr and Finch, barely 25, framed in a too bright home office, lips pressed together like she'd accidentally walked into a funeral in sweatpants. The rest of the participants stayed dark, names only. You could practically smell the NDAs floating in the air. Zach logged in 5 minutes late, which wasn't a great omen. His profile picture, cropped from a yacht event no one asked about, flashed up next to his name, Zachary L., EVP Strategy. He didn't turn his camera on. Smart move. They didn't want his face. They wanted receipts. "Let's begin," said a dry voice. That was Feldman, Northbridge again. Calm, clinical. Someone who didn't need to raise his voice because the numbers always screamed for him. Convened this call to formally address an apparent compliance issue tied to the term sheet executed on date. Feldman continued. Specifically, a personnel clause listed under 4.2b. As you're all aware, disbursement is currently suspended pending clarification. Legal is present, a soft ding. Another participant joined, our Shen Compliance Counsel, Iona Capital. No camera, no sound, just presence. Like a ghost with subpoena power. Zach cleared his throat. "I'd like to preface by saying that this was a miscommunication." "Stop," said Rachel from Hide-Eyed. First time anyone heard her speak since the demo debacle. Her tone could have cut glass. "We're not here for narratives. We're here for documentation. Did you, or did you not, authorize the termination of Laura Kim?" A pause. "Yes," Zach admitted, "but only as part of a strategic realignment. The intention was to evolve product leadership." "Was the board informed in writing?" asked R. Shen. "I spoke to several members informally," Zach said. "That's not an answer," Feldman replied. "Was a written notice of officer termination or transition filed?" Zach was quiet. "Was an amendment submitted regarding 4.2b? "No, but was there a 30-day notice of intent to replace a named officer?" Silence. Then, Feldman said, "Let me help jog your memory." He shared his screen. It was again the original signed term sheet. The cursor hovered over Laura's name under a bright yellow highlight. Mandatory retention Laura Kim, Chief Product Lead. No fine print, no escape hatch. Just words in black and white, and now public record. If there was no amendment, Feldman said, his voice now colder, and no written notice, then this termination qualifies as a material breach. Zach tried to recover. Laura had become obstructive. He wasn't sharing roadmaps. She was undermining cohesion. "I had to make a call, and you based that call on..." Silence. "You must have documentation then," said Rachel. "Emails, warnings, performance reviews, minutes from board meetings. We're consolidating documentation." There was verbal consensus from who? More silence. Someone on the call muted and unmuted accidentally, creating a brief blip. No one spoke. "This is a formal audit inquiry," Shen finally said. "If there are no documents, no communications on file, no timestamps, then you made a unilateral decision in violation of a binding term. That's exposure for the board, exposure for your firm, and risk to every dollar committed to this partnership." Zach's voice finally cracked. "It wasn't sabotage." "Did you just use the word sabotage?" Feldman asked, a beat. Then Feldman leaned in, not physically, but verbally. "No one said sabotage. Until you did." Click, someone else joined. Brett D., board chair. He didn't speak. Just sat in the corner of the grid like a parent showing up after a broken window. The tension didn't rise, it calcified. Zach said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. They hadn't just caught him mid-lie, they caught him mid-disaster, and now he was frozen in the wreckage. Still no camera on my end. I wasn't there. But I didn't need to be. The room had filled with my absence. Every clause, every comma, every name, my name, echoed louder than anything Zach could say now. And the storm was only beginning to touch ground. The motion came just 23 minutes into the compliance audit call. No grand speech, no theatrics, just Feldman's voice, clear and terminal. Given the unresolved breach and lack of documented process, I'm formally motioning to suspend the term sheet until legal clarification is complete and risk mitigation is addressed. This includes withholding the next disbursement tranche. It hit like a thunderclap inside a vacuum. No one even asked for a second. It didn't need one. Behind the scenes, the board erupted. Slack channels filled with elliptical phrases. Need a sidebar now. Loop in legal. Where the hell is the amendment? And private texts lit up between directors, lawyers, even external advisors who hadn't been looped in until now. One wanted their name attached to what had just detonated. Brett, the board chair, called an emergency executive session. They tried to keep it tight, but one of my friends in engineering, still loyal, still watching, leaked the agenda to me within minutes. The bullet points said everything: legal exposure, executive overreach, personnel compliance breach, continuity strategy, and the most damning, Zach's intentions. Because once the panic settled, new narratives started forming, not in Slack threads or public emails, but in the way people started phrasing things in calls and texts. Did he do this on purpose? Was there a plan to push her out and consolidate power? Was he setting up a play for interim CEO? What started as a misstep was curdling into a question of motive. And that meant danger, not just for Zach, but for anyone who backed his move without asking the right questions. By noon, one board member snapped. It happened during a private call, supposed to be just Brett and Zach, but apparently a third director joined late and didn't mute fast enough. I got the audio forwarded anonymously. "You blew this wide open," the voice said, sharp and furious. "We trusted you to lead the transition, and you turned it into a goddamn coup. This isn't realignment, it's malpractice." Zach tried to defend himself, something about momentum and decisiveness. It didn't land, because by then, Brett had already reached out to me. I let it ring twice before answering. "Laura," he said, no preamble, "would you consider returning for continuity?" He didn't apologize, didn't admit fault, just dangled the olive branch like a man trying to put out a house fire with a damp napkin. I paused, just long enough for it to land. "Under revised terms," I said flatly. Brett sighed, meaning, "I want full operational control of product and engineering. I want Zach out. And I want it in writing that no employment changes can occur without 2/3 board approval, retroactive to last week." Another pause, and I added, "You'll announce it, not me." Silence. "Let me take that to council," he said eventually. "You do that," I said, clocks ticking. Because while they scrambled to unbrake the engine Zach had torched, I was already upstream, building a better one. And here's the truth: I didn't want my old job back. I wanted the power they didn't realize they gave me when they let Zach open his mouth in front of investors. The breach clause wasn't just a shield, it was a lever. And now that the board saw the drop in confidence, the suspended funding, the blood on the spreadsheets, they understood what I'd always known. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And by the time the next investor call rolled around, I wasn't just invited. I was being offered the head seat. All I had to do now was accept and rewrite the rules they thought I'd forgotten. The investor conference room was colder than I remembered, more glass, less soul. They'd remodeled it recently, replaced the long oak table with something sleeker, black and glossy, like a coffin lid trying to cosplay as innovation. Brett stood by the wall, arms folded, eyes flicking between the door and the screen like a man waiting to be judged and already knowing the verdict. I walked in through the west elevator, not the main corridor. Emily, my attorney, walked a half step behind me, calm and unreadable in a navy suit that said, "I don't negotiate with middle managers." Her leather folder had the revised terms ready to go. The room quieted as we entered. No greetings, no chairs shuffled. Just heads turning and pulses adjusting. I didn't sit at the demo table. Didn't return to my usual place with the glossy placard that used to read Chief Product Lead Laura Kim. That nameplate had been quietly removed sometime after Zach's stunt. Instead, I walked to the head of the room where no one sat yet, and sat down. Emily placed her folder on the glass. Everyone stared. Then Feldman, cool as ever, leaned back in his chair. His camera was on for once, tie off. No smile. "Gathered today to determine next steps regarding the interim executive structure and term compliance." He turned his head slightly, just enough to look across the table at Zach, who had slithered in moments before through the side door. Feldman raised one eyebrow. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Zach blinked like a deer caught mid-lie. "I'm, Zachary Lane, Executive VP Strategy." "Acting? No one voted you acting anything," Rachel from Hyde said, not looking up from her tablet. Feldman didn't turn back. "Miss Kim, are you ready to resume operations in an interim CEO capacity while we conduct the necessary board restructuring?" I didn't smile, just nodded once. "Pending execution of the revised agreement, yes. My counsel has prepared documentation. Call logs, internal comms, decision chains, I'll need access." And I added, glancing toward Brett without blinking, "Have someone box up my desk. I'll be upstairs." Zach stood, finally. "Wait a second, this isn't a formal vote. I haven't even." A quiet knock at the door. Security, two of them, polite but unmistakable, dressed in business black. The one on the left had a clipboard. The one on the right had Zach's old badge already tucked in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Mr. Lane," the clipboard said, "please come with us. You've been relieved of active duties pending review. Your access has been suspended." Zach turned red, then pale, then translucent. "You can't just—" Emily cleared her throat. "You violated the binding terms of a financial instrument tied to federal securities regulation." Yes, we can." He tried to speak again, but Rachel raised one hand like a teacher calling for quiet. "Zach, go," he went, quietly. No slamming doors, no last word. Just a man who bet everything on a bluff and didn't know the table was rigged before he sat down. I stood. Emily passed out the documents. "Here are the revised terms. We'll need digital signatures within the hour." Feldman leaned back again, finally allowing himself the barest smirk. "Let's not make the same mistake twice." I walked out without looking back. Same building, same hallways. But this time, I didn't turn right toward the bullpen or down toward product. I took the north stairs. Up. When I reached the executive floor, I stopped at the keycard panel. Old badge had been disabled, sure, but that wasn't the one I reached for. Brett had slid a new one across the table at the end of the meeting. Blank, fresh, laminated and sealed. I swiped it. The light turned green, the door clicked open. And just like that, I stepped into my office. Not because I'd clawed my way back, because the law and their own paper trail had built a throne with my name on it. They handed me power. All I did was pick it up, quietly, cleanly, and start again. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.